Hello and welcome back to our MERN Stack series. Today we're going to be looking more into authentication by creating our first proper sign-up route. We'll also learn how to use hashing to store passwords securely. In the last video, we used the Mongoose ODM to firstly connect to our database, and also we created a user model, and then we inserted one single document inside our database. Since we're starting our first proper sign-up route, we can remove the dummy routes that we've already created because we're going to sort of clean up this server.js file. So I'm just going to remove all of these. You can still keep them for your own reference though. And let's just remove this as well. Now let's go over into our user.js model and let's modify this a little bit. So suppose we're creating a social media application and we want people to sign up on it. Well, we're going to need their username, perhaps their name, and then we're going to need a password. So let's keep the email field there maybe, and let's keep a password, a string. So back in our server.js file, let's start creating that route. So we're just going to write in here, let's write app.post, and now we must select the path for our API route. Now, the good syntax would be, you might think you could just write something like sign up, right? But the good syntax or the good practice that we should use is that we're going to use API slash sign up, because this is going to be all of our API routes. So they should all begin with slash API. Now, we should also categorize what this route is about, right? Since this is a route for users to sign up, let's add one more string there, which is users. We're going to see exactly how this is useful in the future. For now, just follow along with this syntax. Let's add our function here. Now, the first thing we need to do is actually get the username, password, and name that would be sent to us inside this request body. We can do that by simply creating a new user object with that request body information. So let's go ahead and create a new const user object, and we're going to use our user model to create that document. Now we need the username, and that would be inside the request body, and you would remember that we can access it like this. Then we also need the password, so that would look something like this: rec.body.password. And then we could also get the name. I believe we stored this as well. Let's just make sure what's inside our model. So we have the name and the email as well, right? So we're going to get the name, rec.body.name, and then we need the email. So that would be rec.body.email. So now we've created a new user object, and we're assuming that all this information will be sent to us inside the request body. Now to save this, we're going to simply type in new user dot save. The good practice is, because sometimes JavaScript functions return promises, right? So we need to actually wait for that function to complete. So the good practice would be to write await right here. Since we're using the await keyword, we would need to make this function asynchronous. So we're just going to type in the async keyword right here to make this whole function synchronous, and that should remove the error that we're seeing right there. Now, there's a pretty obvious issue in our endpoint. A sign-up route should always check whether an existing user already exists with the same username. So what we're going to do is we're going to check for existing user using a certain function given to us by Mongoose models, and that is find one. And inside this, we're going to insert a Mongoose query. A query would look something like this. Now we're saying if you find any one user document inside this collection which has the same username as whatever's been passed in the request body as a username, we want to identify that document as an existing user. What find one does is that it basically returns the first instance that it finds which matches this query. So if any single one such user exists, it's going to return an object, otherwise it's going to return null. So we can just check on this existing user object. We can simply type in if existing user, and this will be true if existing user is a truthy value, which means that if it's not null, then we can simply type in, maybe we can send a response back here. So we can say return res dot status would be 400, since this is an error, and then we can type in a JSON message user already exists. So we already explored the JSON response and the status code in detail in one of our previous videos. So I'm sure you would understand what this is doing here. Now let's get to the hashing part. Now basically we cannot store passwords like this in our database because in case of a security breach, it's really not safe to have all our users' passwords easily accessible. Therefore, we're going to use a new package called bcrypt. So we're going to go over in our terminal and we're going to type in npm install. Let's just make that a little bit bigger. So npm install bcrypt. Let's wait for that to download. Now that it's done, we can simply go over and import it inside our server.js file. So let's go ahead and type that in, require bcrypt, and then we're actually going to use this to hash the password right here. So let's go ahead and create a hashed password, and we're just going to use the bcrypt function. Again, we're going to use await because this is going to return a promise. Await bcrypt dot hash, and then we're going to hash the password that was in the request body, and then we're going to add one more parameter here, which is 10. Now 10 basically is telling the hash function that it needs to do 10 iterations of the hash function. A higher level of hashing would basically mean more security. For now, let's just keep this at 10, and over here, instead of saving this password in our database, we're going to save the hashed password. Let's wind it up by finally adding a success response at the end over here. Let's return res.status 200.json, and the message would be user created successfully. Now, we'd also want to handle any other errors that might occur during any of these functions. For that, the good practice would be to wrap this entire code inside a try catch block. So let's put this entire thing inside a try block. Let's just format that a little bit by selecting it, and you can just hit Control KF inside VS Code to format that. And we're going to catch, and in case of an error, we're just going to catch it right here, and we're going to type in catch error, and for that we can just have we can just console log the error as well, just in case, and the status would be 500. The status code of 500 is used to represent an internal server error. So let's just return a similar message. Now we've finished up with our API route. The one thing that is left, I missed a small keyword here. We have to make sure that we use await here because the find one function is actually asynchronous. So now our entire endpoint is complete. Let's go over and test it. Now let's actually test this API endpoint using Thunder Client. Go over to Thunder Client, select new request, and let's type in the URL that we just created, which would be localhost 3000 slash API slash users slash signup. Make sure to change the type to a post request. Now for the request body, I've actually just created a simple JSON object, so I'm just going to paste it right here. You can use whatever credentials you want. Now let's make sure our server is running by typing in node server.js inside our terminal. Now let's send this. And there we have it, user created successfully. If we go over into our MongoDB and then refresh this collection, we'll be able to see our brand new user. Now let's also test out what happens if we send the same request again with the exact same username. It sends a status code of 400 and it shows the message that the user already exists. If we try to refresh over here, we'll see that no new user has been created. That is working just as we expected. Let's change it again to something else maybe. Maybe this is his other account. Send it again. And the user creation is successful. And over here, we'll be able to see the new user. So that is working just as we expected, and we've successfully created our very first sign up route, all while using the best practices that we need. That is all for today. See you in the next video. Happy coding!